Okay, well, hello everybody, and welcome to the inaugural Forward California Educational Speaker Series panel. Looks like attendees are starting to trickle in, so we'll give folks another minute or two before we get started. But really excited to see so many folks here, and very excited to present a little bit about Forward California, and then hand over to our three speakers, who I'll introduce here shortly. A couple of quick housekeeping items before we get started. There is a Q&A function within this webinar. We will reserve about 25 minutes at the end of the presentations for Q&A. So feel free to start submitting any questions that you have in real time as they come up. We'll be sorting them. We'll answer as many as we can in the background while the panelists are speaking, and then anything that makes sense to bring up at the end, we will pass on to our panelists, and they will answer them for you in real time. So why don't we go ahead and get started? Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Tadaro. I'm one of the three elected co-chairs of the Forward Party here in California. I'm joined on stage today by three wonderful friends of the party, Cal Myers, who is the executive director at ProRep Coalition, Marcella, who is the executive director at Cal RCV, and Andrea, who is the co-founder at the Justice Workshop. So we'll be hearing from all three of them in a minute. Just want to give a quick introduction about Forward Party and who we are and why we're so excited to be bringing this program to you. So Forward Party is, we believe the Forward Party is the party of the future. We're very much invested in electoral reform. We are a party of open ideas, a party that everyone should feel that they can come to and share those ideas and build a better, brighter future together. We are data-driven. We are collaboration-focused. We are pragmatic and responsible. We just relaunched our party in July. And if this is something that is interesting to you, that you would be interested in participating in and helping us build the party of the future, we'll be putting some links into the chat here throughout the time of this call. Feel free to jump on and learn a little bit more about us, and you can always reach out to me directly, and my contact information will be in the chat as well. But I don't want to take up too much time talking about me. I want to make sure that we get into what you're all here for, which is Electoral Reform 101. So an introduction to electoral reform and why we at Forward Party are so excited to be working with the groups and the folks that you're going to hear from about those topics. So without any further ado, I'm going to stop sharing. I'm going to hand over to Kaladin and we can get kicked off.
Hey, thank you, Mike, and thank you to the Forward Party of California for hosting this panel. It's a pleasure to be here. My name's Kaladin. I'm the executive director of ProRep Coalition. ProRep is a new nonprofit launched in 2023 with a mission to enable multi-party democracy in California through education and coalition building for proportional representation. Before explaining what exactly proportional representation is, first, I'd like to provide a little bit of background information about electoral systems, both for myself and the panelists. To do that, I'm going to tell a story. It's the story of democracy in America, which in a lot of ways is the story of elections in America. So the story starts in 1787, a few years after the US gained independence from Britain and committed to forming a democracy, the very first government of the people, by the people, and for the people. At the time, a few people realized, basically, hey, if we're a democracy, we need to start creating some rules and structures to make sure this experiment doesn't go completely off the rails. So they held a constitutional convention. During the convention, the founders established our democracy's core institutions. Among others, we have three branches of government, a system of checks and balances, a Bill of Rights, and a bicameral legislature. But when it came to determining how our democracy would be made up of the people, the founders realized that everyone can't vote on every decision a government makes, and we need representatives to act on behalf of the people. So we formed a representative democracy and decided we'd hold elections every few years to select those representatives. which had never been done before. So at this point in the story, I like to imagine what the founders discussed during the convention when deciding how our elections would be organized and structured. They probably had a few questions to answer, like, what do we want our representatives to look like? To answer that, it seems they took a pretty simple approach. They looked at the fellow property owning white men around them with their little curly wigs and said, well, our representatives should probably look like the people in this room. So they limited who was allowed to hold office. Then I imagine they asked, who will be allowed to vote in elections? And again, with a similarly simple approach, they looked around the room at the white men with the property and the wigs and the tweed vests and the ruffled Victorian shirts and said, well, voting should also probably be reserved to people like us. So they limited who was allowed to vote. The next question they asked was, how are our elections going to be conducted? And how do we translate votes into legislative seats? Unfortunately for this question, they couldn't just look around the room to figure out what would work best for them. The problem was, at the time, no other democracy existed, and no other election system had ever been used except for in Britain's House of Commons. They conducted their elections by cutting the country up into a bunch of geographic regions and having one person elected to represent all of the voters in each region. We call this type of system winner take all. So since that was the only example the founders had to go off of, they said, let's just do the same as Britain. It's tested and true and it works for them, so it can't be that bad. And that's how the founders decided who could participate in our elections and which election system we used. Since then, the story of America's elections has primarily revolved around the fight for equal voting rights. We needed to correct the founders' original error of limiting democratic participation to property-owning white men. So in the 1800s, we removed the requirement of owning property. In 1920, women received the right to vote with the 19th Amendment. And in 1965, the Voting Rights Act prohibited racial discrimination in voting. Today, no citizen over the age of 18 can be denied the right to vote due to their race, religion, sex, disability, or sexual orientation. But we still haven't addressed the other major mistake the founders made, selecting a winner-take-all electoral system. And because of that, in recent decades, the story of America's democracy has entered a new chapter. The challenge we face is no longer opening up who can participate in our elections. It's how our elections are conducted and the impact that's had on political representation. In particular, here's the problem with our politics today in one sentence. Our two-party system is tearing us apart. Over the last few decades, the two parties have drifted increasingly further apart, and we're now at a point where they refuse to cooperate with each other at all, which has led to gridlock, dysfunction, division, and escalating political violence. Politics in America is zero-sum. Representation for one group comes at the expense of another. That means without the opportunity for bipartisan support, the policies created by the party in power are often viewed as harming the interests of the party out of power. And this fundamental flaw in our democracy isn't lost on voters. 85% of Americans believe we need major political reform, and in California, 71% of voters believe more parties are needed. And here's the thing. The reason why we only have two parties is because of the winner-take-all election system the founders selected, which is used for nearly every federal, state, and local election across the country. But when you look around the world and see that most advanced democracies have multiple parties, it's easy to wonder why. And it's because they use a different electoral system for their legislatures that wasn't around when the founders selected ours. They use proportional representation. Here's what it is. Proportional representation, PR, is the basic idea that in legislative elections, a share of votes gets a share of seats. rather than one person representing a district, like in winner-take-all elections. With PR, districts have multiple representatives. So, for example, in a district with 5 representatives, if a party earns 20% of the vote, then they earn 1 seat. It's that simple, which is why it's used by 14 out of 15 of the world's highest ranking democracy, and why there's nearly unanimous consensus among political scientists, democracy scholars, and electoral reform advocates, including those on the panel today, that PR produces a better, healthier, more representative democracy. Now, if we have 2 parties, we want more, and we know that PR produces multi-party democracy. How do we get from point A, our winner-take-all system, to point B, proportional representation? To answer that, we need to look at the different settings of elections throughout the US, mainly federal, state, and local. Federally, adopting PR in Congress would require repealing the Uniform Congressional Districting Act, which would require a majority in both houses. So the route to reform there is partly muddied by the very polarization it aims to address. So that leaves state and local elections. And with that, allow me to reintroduce ProRep Coalition. ProRep Coalition is dedicated to state-level reform. Our mission is to enable multi-party democracy in California through education and coalition building for proportional representation. We have one goal, a 2028 ballot initiative that would adopt proportional representation in California's state legislature, which would make California the first multi-party US state. The reason why we're entirely focused on California's legislature is largely because, to us, the single greatest problem with our democracy today is our 2-party system. While PR produces a range of benefits for local elections that the other panelists will highlight, local elections in California are also nonpartisan, so the outcomes of PR are a bit different there. But at the state level, all state assembly and Senate elections are partisan. So if we want a multi-party democracy, we know the way to get there in California is by adopting PR in our state legislative elections. Which is why the Forward Party has joined our coalition, along with all of California's ballot-qualified alternative parties. ProRep is acting as an electoral reform vehicle that allows all of our states' alternative parties to work together to enable state-level reform. Since launching a year ago, of just the ballot-qualified parties in the coalition, there are 475,000 registered voters between them, which is around half of the signatures we need to get on the ballot. Over the next few years, since we very fortunately just received funding, our efforts are going to grow tremendously, and we do need your help and the rest of the Forward Party's help. So I'll provide my email in the chat, and if you have additional questions or would like to learn more about our efforts, please don't hesitate to reach out. And now I'll pass it to Mike and or the next panelist.
All righty, great. Thank you so much. Just as a reminder, Q&A function is open on the bottom of the webinar. I see some folks are raising hands. If you can just put your question into the Q&A, we'll make sure to address that at the end of the call. So let's hand over to our next speaker, Marcella.
Awesome. Good evening, everyone. I actually have a few slideshows for you all, so let me go ahead and share my screen. Can everyone see my screen here? Oh, good. Awesome. Well, good evening, everyone. My name's Marcela Miranda Caballero. I'm the executive director here at California Ranked Choice Voting Institute. I'm really excited to be here with you all and with my fellow panelists who we've been working in coalition and partnership the last few years and months. My main focus here at Cal RCV is to bring ranked choice voting to the state of California, specifically focusing on all the jurisdictions throughout the state of California, cities and counties. My background is in campaigns and policy in city government. Over the past 11 years, I've been working either on managing federal campaigns or local campaigns here in the county of San Diego, as well as working for city government as a policy director on and off for both sides of the aisle. And one thing that I've learned in doing this work is, as amazing as a candidate can be, as much as an independent thinker that they may be, when they get elected, they end up falling into that party line. And I realized that it's the system, right? It's not the apples that are rotten, it's the barrel that's rotten. So we need to critically and very quickly change the system that we're working with and how we're electing our elected officials so that we really can see change on a grander scale. So that being said, I'm eager to dive into this discussion. I apologize beforehand. We have such a short time. So if I didn't make something clear, please feel free to ask questions towards the end. So that being said, let me go ahead and click to my first slide. So here we have our current system. I usually like to start these presentations by just giving a quick overview of what our system is, kind of piggybacking off of what Caledon mentioned earlier today. Here we have our first past the post system on the top left side here where my cursor is. And this is the mayor of neighborhood parks. So instead of candidates here, I'm using furry woodland creatures for all intents and purposes. So in our current system here, you could see that the rabbit where my cursor is, won the election. And that's fair, right? Because he got most of the votes. But the question here is fair to whom? Because the rabbit got less than 25% of the vote, which means that 75% of the rest of the electorate didn't necessarily vote for this person. So on this graph, you can see how close the squirrel and the porcupine are. They ran pretty solid campaigns, I think we can agree. In the state of California, though, the top right graph that I have over here where my cursor is shows the first past the post system, but how California identified and observed that maybe that's not the best system. Maybe we should do this top two system that we have here in California. So now we want to make sure that everyone in the primary election has at least two candidates to pick from, and that by the math, we have a majority winner, certainly fairer to some than it was before the top two system. But if we look at this bottom middle chart down here where my cursor is, I still only have 40% of the electorate, if I stack these votes together, deciding who's winning this election. And what happens here is that the usual two-party system, candidates make it in the general election, and people who don't necessarily align with the values of those parties or with the parties themselves are usually dissatisfied with the choices that are left and ultimately with the winner of that election. So you might be asking, well, okay, what does this mean? What does ranked choice voting mean? So what is ranked choice voting? Ranked choice voting is an economically and socially just solution where voters rank candidates for an instant runoff. RCV is about electing candidates who better represent the will of the people. RCV is about democracy. So Marcella, what do you mean by ranking candidates, right? So here, how it works, in the general election, you rank the candidates in order of preference. So, right now you just choose one person. In ranked choice voting, you'd be choosing them in order of preference, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And from there, in that first round, if you don't receive 50% plus 1, that's when the ranking comes in. So if I go here, you could see that in this first round, that last candidate, candidate E, did not receive enough votes. So they were eliminated, and no one here received 50% plus 1. So in the second round, you'll see that those 9 votes get redistributed to the rest of the candidates here. Candidate A, B, C, and D receive some of those votes. But we see here that we still didn't receive 50% plus 1. So we're going to go to the next round here. And we see that candidate D gets eliminated because they didn't have enough votes. So those 13 votes get redistributed to candidate A, B, and C. Now, we still haven't hit that threshold. So we're going to eliminate the lowest vote getter again, which is candidate B, who received 23 votes. And we redistribute those votes to the fourth candidate here. Oh, my My PowerPoint's being funky. Okay, so we end up eliminating candidate C because when we distributed those last votes for candidate B, we see here that candidate A actually ends up getting 50% plus 1. So there might be instances here where in that first round, a candidate just wins outright with 50% plus 1, right? And what does this mean? This means that actually 50% of the electorate is voting someone, as opposed to now where you'll see some candidates winning with 25 or 29 or 30% of the vote. And so you really leave the rest of the electorate unhappy. But with ranked choice voting specifically, you need that deep and broad support. So when you're campaigning, you're actually asking people to vote for you as their second or their third choice votes if they're not planning on voting for you in that first round, because as that instant runoff gets done automatically by the software, you might win in those second or those third rounds. So
You're at about halfway, Marcella.
thank you. So where is ranked choice voting used? You probably might be wondering, is this new concept? It's not. It's been used for quite some time now. It's the fastest growing voting reform in the nation, used by more than 11 million people, voters across the United States. This is just a short list here of some places that have it. San Francisco, Oakland, Berkeley, San Leandro, Redondo Beach is going to be using it for the first time next year. Eureka, Albany, state of Maine, Alaska, New York City, and 23 cities in Utah. And this is just, like I said, a short, succinct list. And on the right here, you have a sample ballot, of what it would look like in real life, right? And sometimes you have this write-in option as well. Some active campaigns for ranked choice voting this year are the state of Oregon, the state of Nevada, the state of Idaho, and Washington, D.C. So some benefits of ranked choice voting is majority winner, right? You have that majority winner winning. You're going to have more people aligning. You have the freedom to vote your values. What we've seen is that more candidates from other parties end up running because they don't feel like they need to be tied down to a specific party, right? So if we're talking about the Forward Party, this will allow some of your candidates to really have that chance. It allows for more diverse candidates and campaigns. And again, that doesn't just mean, racial candidates, but also just party, to see more parties run for office, more civil campaigns. So as I mentioned earlier, because you have to campaign for that second or third choice vote, what you want to do sometimes, and what we've seen in campaigns across the country, is that a lot of candidates partner up. And what they do is when they're knocking on doors, they say, hey, so-and-so, I know you're considering voting for me first, but here's my colleague, you should consider voting for them second. And when this colleague or this partnership that you created also knocks on doors, they say, hey, vote for me number one, but vote for my colleague over here number two. So we're really promoting positive campaigns. We want to avoid those negative campaigns where we're all mudslinging. I think all of you have seen negative ads at some point in your life, or received negative mailers. We're tired. We want to hear about the issues, and it really allows the candidates to focus on on their policy platforms and the things that they have in common, because I guarantee you that most of us in this country have more in common than we believe we do. We've just been programmed to be pitted against one another. But at the end of the day, we have a lot in common. And so that's really what we want to look forward to. And it's really something that RCV brings out sometimes when candidates are campaigning. It also allows for more accountability because you need to win with a higher threshold. It really positions elected officials or candidates in a place where they really need to focus on what's important and not on mud throwing or mudslinging across the wall, because they know that if they're not doing their job well, they're going to lose that seat. And again, more choice, right? You want more candidates. You don't want to get stuck with specific candidates. A great example was the California Senate race earlier this year. A lot of people wanted Katie Porter. A lot of people were looking for Barbara Lee. But because one of those Democrats ended up investing in that Republican opponent as one of the tactics of our current system, they prompted this Republican up. And so now you're stuck with this Democrat that potentially you didn't like, and a Republican, right? And if your values align more with Democrats, you're probably going to side that way, but you're going to be dissatisfied at the end of the day with those choices and with that, ultimately with that winner eventually. So I'm going to stop because I think I just threw a lot at you guys. I look forward to hearing your questions. Again, happy to send over any more info. And if I missed anything, I know my panelist here, Andrea, is going to add on to it. So I'm passing on the floor here to Mike, and I think Andrea will go next.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. There's great questions coming into the Q&A, by the way. So I'm flagging a couple that we'll get to at the end. I don't think we're gonna have time for all of them. There's a lot here. So if you would like your question followed up to, and you don't hear an answer to it at the end, I've also put the California@forwardparty.com email address into the chat. So folks can feel free to follow up with us on anything that didn't get answered. We'll make sure those questions get answered for you, or they get distributed to the appropriate people who can. So keep those questions coming. We're looking forward to hearing the Q&A at the end of this. And without further ado, we'll hand over to Andrea for our final presentation.
Thank you, Mike. So Kaladin has talked about proportional representation, okay? And Marcella has talked about ranked choice voting. I want to make sure people understand that those two things, although different, are not mutually exclusive, right? Proportional representation, sometimes we call a system of voting, and then ranked choice voting, we often call it a method or a style of voting, okay? And they both have great benefits. But let me tell you, when you put those two together and have one voting system that includes both proportional representation and ranked choice voting, you have the ultimate winner when you are looking at elections in local jurisdictions, okay? When you combine proportional representation with ranked choice voting, you come up with a system that has so many names. I'm not going to give them all to you. But I will tell you that sometimes it's called proportional ranked choice voting, which is kind of a combination of both the names. Sometimes it's called single transferable vote, which nobody has any idea what that means. So I won't say that, even though STV is the short for that. In San Diego, where I'm based, we like to keep it simple. So we call the combination of those two, of that system of voting and that method of voting, we just call it choice voting. And one of the reasons why we like calling it choice voting is because it's really the best voting for our local jurisdiction. It is the choice voting system for our local jurisdiction as San Diegans, and I think probably for most local jurisdictions. So I want to take a step back before I talk about choice voting and kind of orient us to why are we doing all this, right? And I think the first thing is, and I didn't even think of this before I became really involved with electoral systems. I had never really thought about the fact that the mere process by which we vote determines who the winner is, right? So if you take the same election with the same voters and the same outlook, and you have our current winner take all, first past the post style of voting, and then you had those same people use a choice voting system, you could come up with entirely two different sets of winners. That shows you how crucial it is that we step back and think about what voting system are we using, you know? And I don't think most people have ever thought about that because they don't really know the importance of the election system that we use, you know? Now, if you think most people don't think about the significance of the voting system in terms of who wins, I think even fewer people realize that the election system that we use completely determines how our elected officials behave once they get into office. Okay? The election system provides the incentives for electeds once they're in office. So you want to really take a look at the incentives that your election system gives to elected officials. So this, when you think about it, this is not going to surprise you, right? Our current system of winner take all and first past the post it incentivizes electeds to meet the objectives of special interests and donors. It does not incentivize electeds to meet the needs of the general public. So once you understand that, you realize, oh, okay, so why isn't the will of the people done? Why are we fighting with each other? Why do things seem such a mess? It's because our election system doesn't properly incentivize electeds. Okay? They're incentivized not to do what's in the public interest. So, the bottom line is, if you want a government that serves the public interest, we need to create an electoral system that incentivizes elected officials to do that. So, as I said, I'm located in San Diego. I am the co-founder and co-chair of San Diegans for Justice, and I'm also the board director and co-founder of the Justice Workshop. Both of these organizations are working here in San Diego at the local level to change the election systems for the city of San Diego and also for the county of San Diego. And based on our discussions with grassroots individuals, with all types of individuals throughout the city and throughout the county, it's really clear that they want proportional ranked choice voting, what we call choice voting. Okay. So, choice voting, as I said, is great because it incentivizes electeds to address public concerns and to respond to their constituents as opposed to special interests and donors. Okay. And that's because they have to appeal, the electeds have to appeal to a broad range of individuals in order to get elected. And they can't turn anybody off, because if they turn too many people off, they won't get a first vote, they won't get the second choice vote, and they won't get the third choice vote, on and on and on. So it helps people be a little more positive in terms of their campaigning. The other thing that's really great about choice voting is it enhances the voters' ability to hold electeds accountable. Okay. And that's in part because of the low thresholds that voters have to meet in order to elect a particular individual. For example, if we look at a city council for a city, if that city council has 5 seats, that a person only needs to get a little more than 16% of the vote to elect someone to the council. Okay. If you had 10 seats in a city council, you would only need a little more than 9% of the vote to get someone to get someone on that city council. So what it does is it allows people their voices really to be heard. You know, instead of the plurality voting that Marcella talked about, where you can have a really small percentage of people elect everyone, it's the opposite here. You can have a small percentage of people who can in fact elect one person, and that makes sure that everybody has the ability, not everyone, but most people have the ability to get an elected in office that meets their needs, and that allows for accountability. So let me give an example maybe of using the Forward Party of how proportional ranked choice voting, also known as choice voting, how that can help. The Forward Party is a new party. It's a young party. And you know, there may be some people who are afraid to vote for the Forward Party candidate because gosh, they're afraid if they vote for the forward party candidate, then their vote is going to be wasted, and maybe a person they really hate might get into office. With proportional ranked choice voting, you do away with that completely. You can vote your conscience as your number one choice, and then vote for other candidates, another candidate in second place or third place. You will never have to make that choice again. Also, taking forward the forward party as an example, if you have, for example, a city council with 10 members on it, if the forward party can band together and get just a little bit more than 9% of the vote, they can make sure that there's a forward party candidate on their city council. That is amazing, and it's totally different than what we have right now. So just briefly, I'll talk about just a couple hurdles that there are to getting proportional ranked choice voting into use. The first one is at the city level. It is very clear that cities in California can decide to move to choice voting. The hurdles are twofold. First of all, if you need to get it through city council, it's going to be tough because city council members won their seats through the current election system, and they're not really going to want to change it. You know, a lot of times they give lip service to looking at it, but ultimately they really rarely vote to change it. Sometimes, but it's difficult. The other possibility is going through an initiative. And that can be great because you can get exactly what the people want. The only problem is you have to raise the money for an initiative, and an initiative can be pricey. With respect to counties, it's a little bit unclear whether a county can change its voting system without specific legislation being passed for that. But those are the two hurdles, but I think we can definitely overcome them. And here in San Diego, we are working to make sure that they are overcome and working toward a 2028 campaign alongside Caledon. And with that, I can hardly wait to hear your questions.
Amazing. Thank you so much. So again, we have a lot of questions that have come in. This has been a whirlwind tour of electoral reform, and so I'm sure there are a billion questions that we're not going to be able to get to today. But thank all three of you so much for participating and giving your insights into your areas. I think it's given us all a lot of food for thought. If there's a specific topic, by the way, that folks are really interested in digging in more into, maybe a 201 instead of a 101 introduction, let us know at california.forwardparty.com, california@forwardparty.com, so we can put another speaker series activity on the calendar and dig into this in a little bit more detail. So I've tried to group a couple of questions together, starting with some of the more procedural and getting into some of the more philosophical. So let's get through some of the quick procedural questions. There was a question about RCV, and Marcella, when you say round, are you talking about literally another round of people voting, or is this mathematical vote distribution? What's the mechanism for proceeding through the rounds in RCV?
Yeah, so when you're voting in ranked choice voting, your ballot will have different candidates on there. And so you're going to immediately rank all those candidates. And the system that you might be using, sometimes we have Dominion or Heart, depending on where you're at here in California, the software will automatically calculate. So if in that first round, no one won that 50% plus one, the computer will automatically calculate the round number 2 of all the second choice candidates, but you won't have to go back to the ballot box and vote again. You'll already do everything when you initially fill out your ballot. So there's not going to be any more work for the voter.
Great. Thank you so much for clarifying. And let's go over to Caledon. A question about how would proportional representation work in a nonpartisan election?
Well, I think that Andrea mentioned that pretty thoroughly. Local elections in California, municipal elections, are all nonpartisan. So STV or choice voting presents a range of benefits, mainly in the form of your vote more or less is directly translated into a seat. But I actually don't think I'm the best person to answer this question because we are focused at state level, which are partisan. So I would definitely refer you back to Marcelo or Andrea to talk about PR's impact in nonpartisan elections.
Andrea, do you want to pick up that question?
Sure. Whether it's partisan or not, I don't think really affects the election per se, right? If you're using choice voting and you have 5 candidates to pick from, even if you don't know what party they belong to, you would still rank them. If you had, for example, let's say you have a city council district and you have 5 people running for a city council, and because you have proportional representation, you can elect 3 city council members from your district. You would still do the same even if there were no parties. So I don't think it would make a difference. Marcella, do you agree?
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Okay. Maybe a little bit more of a philosophical question. And we'll start with Andrea, but I'd love for anyone who wants to weigh in on this. So a couple of questions have come through about vote splitting or gaming the system in the current voting method. Is it possible that a ranked choice method could be gamed by 2 collaborating candidates? Or how does vote splitting work in terms of collaboration or competition in RCV?
Well, I would say this. Collaboration among candidates is a good thing under choice voting and RCV. And that I was in Ireland in June for the Irish elections to observe their elections using choice voting. And you would see candidates supporting one another. Vote for me as your number one choice. But if you don't vote for me, as please vote for this other candidate. So that's really a good thing. I think that proportional ranked choice voting or choice voting, it has much less of an ability to be gamed than the current system. And I don't know if that is enough of a comfort to the person who asked the question. But and one thing that's also very good about choice voting is that it really reduces the effect of gerrymandering. So it actually addresses some of the system gaming techniques that people currently use. Marcella, I see you shaking your head.
Yeah, no, I'm just agreeing with you with all your points, and I was just going to say, at least from what we've seen, in ranked choice voting, vote splitting is less of an issue because the system accounts for voters' preferences beyond their first choice. This means that even if similar candidates are running, their supporters' votes can be redistributed to reflect their true preferences, which helps to ensure that the winning candidate has broad support. As I mentioned, deep and broad support is what we're looking for here.
Yeah, I would just add and piggyback on both of those comments that in countries that have proportional representation, when you ask them, what do you guys do about gerrymandering in your country? They say, what do we do about what? And that's because gerrymandering doesn't exist. When you have multi-member districts instead of single-member districts, what gerrymandering is, it's the manipulation of district boundaries to advantage one party or one candidate over others. But when you have much larger districts that have multiple representatives coming out of them, you're not able to manipulate those boundaries in a way that's going to result in any actual advantage. So gerrymandering just isn't a thing in countries that use proportional representation.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you all for the answers. And I think this is a good segue into a more historical perspective that somebody asked about. Many other countries, like you just mentioned, have implemented proportional representation. In general, what were the methods they did to do that? Did they start with one system and move to another? Or was this some upheaval that happened in their government that allowed them to start from scratch? Like what was the path that other countries followed to get proportional representation?
I can tackle that.
Yeah, go for it.
Okay, so let's kind of categorize this into 2 different areas. There's the original electoral system that a country selects when they become a representative democracy. And that's how the vast majority of countries that have proportional representation selected it. So, for example, in Germany after World War II, when they were reforming their government, by that time, proportional representation had already been around, and they had the comparative awareness to realize that it's a superior electoral system than winner take all, so they selected it. And that's why most of the countries that are in the process of democratization do select proportional representation at a much higher rate than they do winner take all elections. So just generally what you're finding over time is that more and more countries are gravitating towards PR. So that's the one category, when they're able to sort of start from scratch and decide on what election system they want. The other category is electoral reform. There are 3 countries that have successfully transitioned from a plurality winner-take-all system to proportional representation. They're Japan, Italy, and New Zealand. Every single one of them has a highly unique route to reform that can't necessarily be replicated because they were very much informed by the opportunities of reform that were available to them. In Japan and Italy, there was a mixture of public pressure and a few incumbent lawmakers that really took the initiative to advance reform. But in New Zealand, which is actually a country that we at ProRep based a lot of our theory of change on, there was a referendum. So I think it was in 1991, they actually placed to a public vote the choice to leave their winner-take-all elections to proportional representation. And they conducted a widespread campaign, and there was so much widespread voter dissatisfaction that they were able to effectively communicate that PR will bring about a multi-party democracy and everyone's voices will be fairly represented. And they passed it with a rate of 80%. And since then, New Zealand has consistently climbed the ranks of the highest performing democracies around the world. So like that's the actual tactical way this is going on a little bit. But like from a sort of a philosophical standpoint, which I hate to say, like philosophical, we don't really want incumbent legislators to write the rules of the game that they're playing. So taking power into our own hands and pursuing methods that engage our direct democracy in those institutions is actually very much something that we want to do in the best interest of everyone. Because if we're leaving it in the hands of politicians, we might not get the results that we really want. That was a long answer, sorry. But that's the history.
You just condensed a semester's worth of learning into about 3 minutes there, so I think well done. Kind of elevating more to some more of the tactics around voting in this method. We have a question that's come in. Can you explain more about why it's important to vote for all slots if using RCV versus just the first slot? So how does it work from a voting tactical perspective to do RCV, and why is it important to vote for multiple slots versus just one? Why don't we start with Marcella, but I'll open it up to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, it's totally okay if someone wants to bullet vote, but the whole point of ranking your candidates, it's to give you more choice, to give you the power. So the point of RCV is giving the voters more choice, more power when it comes to electing candidates. So if you opt to not rank the rest of the candidates, nothing's going to happen. Your ballot's still going to be counted. However, you're giving up that power that was offered by using this method of voting. So you're kind of giving up, that order of preference and potentially, giving your support to someone that you might tolerate, right? It's not your favorite choice, but someone that you want to tolerate. So that's why we want to always encourage folks to fill out that ballot and definitely rank that last person that you absolutely loathe last, but still get on there and use that power that you have with ranked choice voting. Is there anything else someone wants to add to that?
No, just that if you only vote for one person and that person doesn't win, then you haven't exercised your ability to choose
Right.
someone else. You just gave up that opportunity. Now you can do that. I mean, if you absolutely hate all of the rest of the candidates and do not care one whit which one is elected, then it might make sense to only vote for one. But if there are some you hate less than others, it's a better idea to go ahead and rank all the candidates.
Excellent. Okay, question. We've focused a lot on the positives. I think, Andrea, you started to go into some of the challenges or issues with implementing a system like this. We've also seen there's been some pushback within the country in certain localities. One question brought up the lawsuit in Alaska that was filed to throw out the results of RCV. More close to home, we've seen some folks expressing dissatisfaction of the outcome of elections in Oakland. So maybe we can talk a little bit about what some of the perceived downsides of this type of electoral reform are and how you might answer questions about them. Why don't we start with you, Andrea?
So I will be very blunt about this. By changing to choice voting, we are totally upending the system and giving power to the electorate. People who are currently in power, organizations currently in power, loathe that and will do anything to try to subvert this effort, right? You talked about Oakland. Again, it is about being dissatisfied that you did not get your way when you're used to usually getting your way. And there are going to be people who are upset like that. There are going to be people who are like, I've always been able to get my way. I've always been able to decide who the winner is going to be. You know, organizations, donors, special interests. And they're going to be really mad about that. And they're going to attack it any way they can. And even when choice voting has been put into place, they're going to keep trying to attack it until people really feel comfortable using it and love it, as they do, for example, in Ireland. The Irish love their voting system. They absolutely love it. So I think that's really what has to be said. If I can just say it plainly, the hurdle is that the entrenched class, so to speak, isn't going to give up without a fight, and that's going to be tough. And they're going to keep fighting. And that's really what all that's about. And I'll give it over to you, Kaladin.
I don't have much more to add. I think what's used in Oakland and Alaska at least are predominantly RCV, which we're at the state level, we haven't had to deal with that kind of criticism because we're also the first organization to be advancing PR at the state level, which is really exciting. And it also gives us the luxury of not needing to deal with that pushback. And we're trying to fly under the radar because, to Andrea's point, we're going to face significant opposition from the powers that be that don't want a system like this. Especially when it comes to PR and the messaging around it that'll lead to multi-party democracy. You know, it's probably not gonna go over too well with them. But I can't really speak to Alaska or Oakland.
And just to piggyback off that real quick, Andrea and I are doing the work on the ground and mobilizing and creating coalitions with some of these power groups. And this includes, labor unions, voting rights groups, several folks from different parties, local community groups, because and again, this is not just one party. This is, I guess, at the very least, both of our main parties that are not necessarily supportive of this, because it means that they will give up some of that power. And again, the key word here is the power should be in the hands of the voters, of us, not of these power players. And so that's why sometimes there's that resistance. But when you take a step back and really explain it to them and go through the motions of it, sometimes they come out of it and they say, oh, okay, I get it. This is for democracy. Like, we can still be part of this and have our stake in it. It's going to function differently. And that happened in Alaska. Sarah Palin was upset that she lost and she made a big deal about it. But the point there is Sarah Palin didn't campaign with a ranked choice voting method, and she was offered that help she didn't want to do it. And so she ultimately ended up losing, but at least for the Republican Party, they gained a lot of seats with ranked choice voting in Alaska. So, they need to analyze it better when it comes to really, formulating that opinion, because it can help different parties. You just have to know how to use it. Oakland as well, folks who are upset about it, they're dissatisfied with the person that won, but when in the previous election, when the person that won that they supported won, they were okay with it. So it's usually their dissatisfaction with the person who wins, not necessarily with the actual system. So when it goes their way, they're cool with it. When it doesn't go their way, they're not cool with it.
Yeah, I just want to go back to something that Andrea said. I can't fathom having a world where everyone is happy with the voting system they have. It's exciting to be part of a team that's helping to bring that vision into fruition. Good for Ireland and hopefully good for us in the near future as well. We have about 2 minutes left in the webinar, and so I just wanted to make sure we gave some opportunities to all three of you to give any closing remarks you might have. Just one final plug from me, at least for the Forward Party. We love putting on panels like this. It's so important that we have the ability to expose everyone we can to these ideas that help advance the cause of democracy in our state. So thank you to the three of you for participating. Thank you all to the attendees for joining. I know there's a handful of questions we didn't have a chance to get to. If you want to submit those to california@forwardparty.com, I'll be more than happy to make sure those get distributed to the appropriate folks. And with that, any closing remarks the three of you want to give, I'll hand the floor over to you. And let's start with Kaladin.
No, nothing in particular. I think if there was a thesis to summarize, because we talked about a lot of different things here, and a lot of them are overlapping in many ways. ProRep Coalition is focused on state level reform, in particular, adopting proportional representation through a 2028 ballot initiative. There's many types of PR, one of which integrates RCV into it, which is a voting method. So PR is an electoral system, and RCV is a voting method, which has a lot of benefits in and of itself, especially at the local level. So if that's a helpful way of kind of differentiating, but also understanding the overlap, I hope that's helpful. And I'll pass to Andrea.
Marcella, we should probably go in order. Marcella, why don't you go next?
And I'm on mute. Thank you, Kaladin. Just to piggyback off of him too, we're, like I mentioned earlier, we're focused on passing ranked choice voting in several jurisdictions throughout the state of California, but ultimately we do want to see it on a state level as well. That is the North Star goal. So we all three of us on this call will be working together to achieve that, and make sure that we're on the same page as we're working on this electoral reform. If you guys are interested in some of the work that Cal RCV is doing, I believe Mike posted our website and my contact info on there. This year, we currently have a campaign running in Santa Clara County for ranked choice voting. And then we also have the city of Richmond, who has placed ranked choice voting on their ballot for this year. So we're very much looking forward to those, and just looking ahead, we're looking into LA County. I'll be working with Andrea on San Diego County and the city of San Diego, and the city of Carlsbad here in San Diego County. And Andrea, it's your turn.
Yes, thank you. Thank you. I just want to say how I came to work on electoral justice, because it wasn't how I first started. I actually wrote a charter amendment for the city of San Diego. Ultimately, after about 7 or 8 years of work, it passed with 75% of the vote. The problem was it took 7 or 8 years to get there, not because the people didn't want it. It was because the electeds and the powers that be wanted to stop it. And when I got through that, and we won with 75% of the vote, and we had no money to run the campaign. Trust me, it was not a well-funded campaign. And it just shows how much people really wanted it. I thought to myself, how in the world can elected officials work so hard to kill something that the voters want? And how do we have those people in office? And let's be clear, even after it passed with 75% of the vote, they still kept trying to kill it. And I thought there is something very wrong with our electoral system that allows electeds to try to work their best to destroy something that the voters overwhelmingly wanted. And so it became my mission to find out what that was, how that was, and try to change that. And I liken that to what you're doing. As the Forward Party, you're growing your members, you're working to get people in office, but you have to work just as hard to remove the barriers that are going to keep you from reaching your goals. And that barrier is our election system. You have to work just as hard at that, if not more so, than growing your party. And I will leave you with that.
Well said. And thank you again to everyone who participated. Thank you to our three panelists. This has been fantastic. I'll send the link for Forward Party into the chat one more time. If you liked the speaker panel, if you want to hear more of this, sign up through that website. You'll be alerted. We're doing a speaker series every month on topics just like this. So please join us in the future. Please support these three great organizations you've heard about today. And I hope everyone has a fantastic evening. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.